Hey everybody, welcome to those are my final picks for Week 13 of the NFL season over on DraftKings, the more finalized and polished version of the first look video we do earlier in the week. And if you do find this video helpful in any way possible, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. If you want to take that one step further, kind of fish number over on Patreon is the beginning of the month, so it is one of the best times to do so. But you get access to the entire spreadsheet, projections, ownership projections, which are super important each and every single weekend, the optimizer, all that fun stuff link can be found down below, not just for the NFL, but the NBA as well. Then MLB and NASCAR, once those seasons start back up again. So go check it out. Link can be found down below. And last but not least, this video is sponsored by PrizePicks. I'm sure most of you know this by now, but if you don't, it's daily fantasy sports simplified. Just you versus the projections. There's no sharks, 150 max contests or salary cap restrictions or anything like that. Just you versus the props they offer each and every single day. And as of right now, when you sign over on PrizePicks, you can get a free money bonus that is plus a match up to $100 when you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you. It's really fun. I play on there every single week in addition to DraftKings, so it's always fun just to get some extra action over there. And plus, they have some pretty soft lines, so I really would recommend checking it out. But I think that's it for the plugs for the most part. So without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as always, we'll start with the quarterback position. Like I said in the first look video, I don't think this is a super deep spot this weekend, so I'm kind of having a tight group of players at the QB position. We'll start up top with Matthew Stafford, $7,300. The Rams have lost their past 3 games, and they're definitely trending in the wrong direction. But this is a good bounce back spot versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. I feel like I've said that the past couple of games for the Rams, but this really hasn't come to fruition. Now, Matthew Stafford didn't have a bad fantasy game last week, but the Rams definitely just weren't looking too hot. But they should bounce back here versus Jacksonville. They have one of the highest implied team totals in the slate here at 30.5, just behind the Buccaneers at 30.75. They're 13-point favorites. Both these teams actually play at a pretty fast pace, which I do like for DFS purposes. Stafford's averaging on 300 passing yards and 2.5 passing touchdowns per game this season. I will say Odell is trending in the wrong direction in terms of playing this weekend. He got downgraded to a DNP in practice on Thursday. I've not seen the practice reports today yet. I'm recording this too early in the morning for what's going to happen on Friday. But if he happens to be out, I would say it's a little bit of a hit to Matthew Stafford, but I think he'll be just fine with Cooper Kupp, Tyler Higbee, and Van Jefferson. And Jaguars are dead last 32nd DVA versus the pass, despite being 8th in terms of the fewest fantasy points allowed per game to the QB position. But I definitely think Matthew Stafford in tournaments is a very strong way to go. I don't think he's a cash game quarterback this weekend. I'd rather play Henderson, to be honest, in cash rather than the Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp. But Cooper Kupp's still great playing cash. It's just really hard to get to him at that price point. But if you go cheaper at running backs this weekend, that's not awful. But I do think Stafford is a great tournament target. Tom Brady, $7,200. So the Buccaneers scored like 40 points last week, and Tom Brady somehow just didn't really hit value. Neither did Chris Godwin or Mike Evans. It was pretty much the Gronk and Leonard Fournette show. But assuming that doesn't happen again, it's hard not to like Tom Brady. He's really cheap at $7,200, and he typically goes off each and every single week. I mean, his numbers are just so good in the season, and him and his pass catching options are really not that expensive every single week. Like 310 passing yards, nearly 2 3/4 touchdowns, and 40 passing attempts per game. No Antonio Brown again, so it is a bit of a hit, but he hasn't been playing with Antonio Brown the past month or so now, so I wouldn't say it's a big deal. He'll be just fine with Godwin, Evans, and Gronk, then Fournette out of the backfield. And Atlanta's a great matchup here. I will say I do worry about them being 11-point favorites because they can probably take their foot off the gas if they want, but we haven't really seen that be the case with the Buccaneers. Like, if they end up blowing out the Falcons, Tom Brady probably already has around 25, 30 DraftKings points, so I'm not too worried about it. Even if we get like 3.5 quarters of play out of him, Falcons are 29th DVA versus the pass and 27th versus quarterbacks, and it is very easy to stack him up with any of his pass catching options, or 2 if you so choose to go that way. Jalen Hurts, $7,000, is dealing with injuries, but if he is good to go, he is facing the Jets, and they are dead last versus the run this year. And I mentioned the run other than the pass, just because Jalen Hurts, we play him because of his rushing ability. I don't really care what he does through the air. Yeah, I mean, if he has a good game through the air, it's obviously a big boost for me, but if he can give me like 60, 70 yards on the ground and hopefully a rushing touchdown, even 100, 200 passing yards with maybe 0-1 passing touchdown, that's a fine day for me. Only $7,000. Plus, the Jets are 31st DVA versus the pass as well. So either way, they're terrible defensively. So I think Jalen Hurts is definitely viable, but I'll have to monitor his situation throughout the week. But assuming he'll be good to go, hopefully 26-point implied team total for the Eagles here. Justin Herbert, as of right now, I have him as the highest projected owned quarterback on the slate, although I will say it's very close between him and Tom Brady. I could see people going either way because Brady's just too cheap. And if you're playing Chris Godwin, it's such an easy plug. And I know he busted last week, but I'm willing to go right back to the well there. But Herbert, great game last week versus the Broncos. It's a good spot versus Cincy. I definitely like the game stacks here. It's got one of the highest over-runners on the slate at 50.5. I think it's tied with the Falcons and the Buccaneers for being the highest. but that's an 11-point spread. This is only a 3-point spread, and the Chargers find themselves as road dogs here. So I'm hoping Herbert can just have another fantastic game. He should be throwing the ball a lot versus the Bengals. I wouldn't say it's an amazing matchup. They're 19th DVA versus the pass, but they're allowing the 7th fewest points per game to quarterbacks. But Herbert, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, or tight end, Jared Cook, whatever, which way you want to go, or Austin Eckler out of the backfield. I think Charger stacks are definitely in play, as well as Bengal stacks. Derek Carr, $6,000. Probably no Darren Waller, so it's definitely a hit to him, but I still like the Raiders here. Him, Foster Moreau, Hunter Renfrow, I think these are decent cheap stacks in this slate. If you just want to spend up for guys like Jonathan Taylor, Cooper Kupp, I don't think the Raiders are going to kill you. They still have a 25.5 point implied team total, only a 1.5 point spread here, and a 49.5 point over-under. Like, this is a bit of a sneaky game here. I'm not saying it's going to be like under-owned or anything, because people are going to play Foster Moreau, Hunter Renfrow, Antonio Gibson on the Washington football team, but it's still not going to be like as popular as some of these other teams. And these guys are at some pretty fair price points. In Washington, they're allowing the most points per game in the quarterback position this year, and they're 30th DVA versus the pass. I don't think Derek Carr's a bad play at that cheap price point. Moving on to the running back position, there is some pretty solid plays this weekend, no matter which price range you're looking at. You can go up top with Jonathan Taylor, massive price point. You have the 7 to 8K range that looks pretty good, and that upper to 5 to low 6K range that also is pretty loaded. So it's kind of a tough week in terms of just trying to figure out which 2 or 3 you want to play, because you can make a case for about 10 guys this week, and I wouldn't have a problem with that. We'll start with Jonathan Taylor, $9,200. He goes off pretty much every single week. I think we just have to accept that fact. He is the new Derrick Henry. It's not a guy that gets like 30, 35 touches, but he is very, very good with the touches he gets, and we should probably expect 20, 25 plus here versus Houston. They're 10-point favorites. Their offensive line should be just fine versus Houston's defensive front. He's averaging 100 rushing yards per game this year, 17.5 carries, although that's definitely been boosted up recently. Like earlier in the year, he wasn't getting as many touches, but that's definitely changed as the season has progressed. Over a touchdown per game, nearly 6 yards per carry. And he's using the passing game too, 3.5 targets per game and 30 receiving yards with an 11% target share. Houston this season, 22nd versus running backs and 25th DV versus the run. If you have the money for Taylor, by all means play him, because he's a smash play. And he's currently I think that he's either first or second. Him and Cooper Kupp are my highest projected players, and it's actually by a little decent margin as well. Joe Mixon, $8,100. He's been on fire recently, scoring touchdowns, facing the Chargers, who are a bit of a run funnel defense. Not that bad versus the pass. Not saying I would fade pass catchers versus the Chargers, but versus the run, they're dead last. 32nd DVA versus the run, and 27th versus running backs, having over 120 rushing yards and over 1.25 touchdowns per game. So I think Joe Mixon should definitely keep the good times rolling here. High scoring game according to Vegas, high implied team total, 3-point favorites, playing at home. No reason really not to like Mixon besides the price point. Alexander Madison has smashed in those 2 games that Dalvin Cook has missed this year. So just facing Detroit, their favorites, 7-point favorites. They're not playing at home, but Alexander Madison should have a really solid game. The thing is, I don't think he's going to be insanely high owned. I have him as, I think, top 6 in terms of ownership and on the lower end of the spectrum there, just because people are going to probably just play the cheap running backs. Like, why not just play Eli Mitchell, James Conner, Antonio Gibson, or Jamal Williams? I mean, he's kind of priced like they have Dalvin Cook priced. He's a little bit cheaper, but I mean, he's smashed in those 2 games. So the thing is, Dalvin Cook, yeah, he gets a couple carries taken away from Alexander Madison. Alexander Madison is going to get pretty much the entire workload here. And it's a great spot versus Detroit. If he's going to go under-owned just because of all the other running backs we have on this slate, I like being overweight in tournaments. I don't think we have to gym in cash games or anything, but it's a great spot versus Detroit. Allowing the 4th most points per game to running backs. Loving Madison in all formats, although I'm kind of leaning towards tournaments at this point, just looking at the ownership projections that we have so far this week, and at least what I have in my optimizer right now. Leonard Fournette, $7,300 facing Atlanta. He went off last week in a really tough spot versus the Colts. They were allowing like the 2nd fewest points to running backs heading into that week. Bit of a pass funnel defense, so definitely worse versus the pass. But Leonard Fournette, the way he's utilizing that offense, he can always get 15, 20 carries and like 5+ targets. So I think he's going to be played every single weekend. Facing Atlanta, not a team that's been great versus running backs so far this year. Currently 23rd DVA versus the run and 26 versus running backs. Also allowing over 6 catches, nearly 50 receiving yards per game, which I think works right in Leonard Fournette's favor. He's got close to a 14% target share on an offense that throws the ball around 40 times per game, so that's quite valuable. I mean, if he's going to get us 5+ targets and 15+ carries, I mean, hard to play Fournette, even though he's above $7,000 this week. Darrell Henderson, $6,100. He's been questionable. You got to assume he's going to play, though, and if that's the case, he's a 13-point favorite, playing at home versus Jacksonville. They are a bit of a pass funnel, but I'm still going to play Darrell Henderson versus Jacksonville. I'm not too worried about that. The Rams' offense is good enough where they should be fine. 30.5 implied team total. He should get you 15 plus touches, a decent amount through the air. No reason not to like Darrell Henderson here at that very cheap price point. Eli Mitchell has had, I believe, 27 carries in back-to-back weeks. No Deebo Samuel, which I know that sounds weird saying there's no wide receiver, but he was actually stealing some carries the past couple of weeks. But with him out of the picture, the offense is going to revolve around Eli Mitchell. You have to assume Seattle's a team that has not been very good versus running backs so far this season. They're 11th DVA versus the run, but they're also allowing the second most points per game to running backs. And they're getting killed through the air, 7.5 catches and over 70 receiving yards, specifically to running backs. But Eli Mitchell, assuming we get 20 plus carries here, 20 plus total touches, no reason to like Mitchell at $6,000. I would say he's like a cash lock, but with so many other good cheap running backs and some of their price points and other good matchups, it's hard to say these guys are locks, but they're all fantastic plays. James Conner, no Chase Edmonds. Sounds like Kyler Murray's going to be back, which is definitely a big boost to the offense. Conner has been using the passing game recently. You're probably seeing around 20 total touches out of James Conner with a few catches, which is just fine. I wouldn't say the matchup for Chicago is amazing or anything, but I don't really care about matchups too much. It's nice when the guy has a good matchup, but situation and just the game environment I think is a little bit more important. So I think James Conner is definitely going to be playable there. Antonio Gibson, $5,700, had over 30 total touches last week versus the Seahawks. And it looks like J.D. McKissic is trending in the wrong direction. He has a concussion. He doesn't get practice this week. Hard to imagine he is going to play. So if Gibson is just a clear cut back in that backfield, $5,700 versus the Raiders. He had 7 catches last week and I believe 24 carries. No reason not to like Antonio Gibson. He's just too cheap, in my opinion. Then Jamal Williams, $5,400. DeAndre Swift was actually ruled out about 15, 20 minutes ago, so he is just the only running back there. He's probably going to get you around 20 total touches with a decent amount through the air because we know Jared Goff loves dumping it off to his running backs. Doesn't matter whether it's DeAndre Swift or Jamal Williams. DeAndre Swift is a much better running back than Jamal Williams, but $5,400 in that kind of situation for running back, I mean, hard to pass that up. I imagine he's going to be quite popular this weekend. I currently have him top 5 in ownership projections as of right now, and he's currently my highest point per dollar running back projection-wise on the entire slate. Minnesota, another team that's been great versus running backs this year. I know it doesn't feel great. If you play Madison and Jamal Williams together, I think it's fine. People don't usually like to play the same running backs, or the same backs in the same game, I should say. But when you have pass catching upside, I don't really think it matters too much. And Minnesota's 29th DVA versus the run this year, so I think Williams at that price point with no DeAndre Swift certainly going to be in play just because of the sheer amount of volume he'll have at that price point. Then moving on to the wide receivers, I try to always keep this as simple as possible because it really just depends on which quarterback you're using, which game stacks you're looking at, or who you're running it back with. So up top, Cooper Kupp, if you're playing Matthew Stafford, play Cooper Kupp. Also look at Van Jefferson with Odell looking like he's not going to play now, but if Odell happens to play, you could play him too. But purely tournament options there, but Cooper Kupp you can play in any format. If you're playing Justin Herbert, Mike Williams, and Keenan Allen has one of the highest floors of any wide receiver in all the NFL each and every single week. You're probably going to get you 10 plus targets out of Keenan Allen. He's probably going to catch most of them. He just doesn't really score touchdowns so far this year, but I like the game environment. I'm going to move these guys to the target numbers just so you can see on the screen. Just so I'm going to read them off for you guys so you can see the kind of volume these guys get in their respective offenses. Deontay Johnson seems like he gets like 12 or 13 targets every single weekend. I think he's fine. I don't really love the game environment here versus Baltimore, but Deontay, just because of volume, is going to be fine. He's averaging 11 targets per game this season. Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, if you're using Tom Brady with no Antonio Brown, I know he burned you last week, but Chris Godwin's even cheaper this weekend, $6,600, facing Atlanta, who's been very bad versus the pass so far this season, currently ranking 29th DVA versus the pass and 20th versus wide receivers. No reason to believe Chris Godwin can't get there. I mean, roster in DFS this season, Jalen Waddle, I will say, it looks like Devontae Parker is going to be back, and he's averaging 8.4 targets per game this year, so that will hurt Waddle a little bit, but I think both these guys are fine and a very easy matchup versus the New York Giants. Brandon Cooks, not really looking to play Tyrod Taylor, but it is a good matchup versus the Colts. Their secondary is definitely not very good, and Cooks averaging 8 targets per game with close to a 30% target share, $5,900. Did catch a touchdown last week. I think he's playable, but not a must play or anything. If you're playing Derek Carr, stacking the game up a little bit, I don't think Hunter Renfrow is a bad play. I know he's not an exciting player, but he did have a great game on Thanksgiving, and he's pretty cheap for the volume that he gets. T. Higgins on the opposite side, if you're doing the Charger stacks, I think he's a fine run back option. Not a big fan of Joe Burrow stacks, but if you are stacking the Chargers, I got Keenan Allen, Justin Herbert, running back T. Higgins. I think that's fine. He had a nice blow-up game last week, over 100 yards, and got to the end zone. Michael Pittman, I think, is a fine cash play. I am not playing Carson Wentz on this slate. I just worry about the Colts getting up to a big lead, so they don't really throw the ball too much, which can certainly happen. Although we've seen many scenarios this season where the Colts have had a lead, Michael Pittman still gets there, so I think he's fine. Although I will say T.Y. Hilton, he tends to be the guy that absolutely kills Houston, but Michael Pittman's definitely the wide receiver one in this offense at this point this season. Brandon Ayuk with no Deebo Samuel, I think that kind of speaks for itself in a good matchup versus Seattle. And Devontae Parker, I already mentioned, but he's only $3,900, and he's been practicing this weekend, so I think the assumption is that he's going to play. And like I said, averaging nearly 8.5 targets per game in the small amounts of games he's played so far this season if you need an absolute punt option. Moving on to the tight ends, a couple guys up top I like, George Kittle and Rob Gronkowski. Gronkowski currently projecting him to be the highest owned tight end on the entire slate, although I think if you're playing cash games, you'll see Foster Moreau as the chalk tight end. We're also cutting off James O'Shaughnessy's name here. It's a very long name there. But George Kittle, no Deebo Samuel, definitely opens up some more targets for him facing Seattle. Good matchup there for Kittle. I think he's a little bit too cheap at $5,900. Gronkowski, I like Tom Brady. Get all his pass catching options you can get in there if you are stacking them up. Tyler Higbee, because if you're playing Tom Brady, some of his pass catching options have to go off, or he's not going to have a good game because he's not going to get there on the ground. Tom Brady's going to get, like, if we're lucky, 2 yards because his rushing prop each and every single week is like 0.5 or 1.5 rushing yards. Like, we need some of his pass catching options to go off. That's the only way that Tom Brady's going to hit. So you got to roster one of his pass catching options with him. If you roster Tom Brady, just makes sense. Tyler Higbee, I think he's a good way to get different on this slate because people are either going to pay up for George Kittle, Rob Gronkowski, or they're going to go all the way down low for guys like Foster Moreau with no Darren Waller, or James O'Shaughnessy with no Dan Arnold. So Tyler Higbee kind of right in the middle there. You just want exposure to the Rams passing attack versus right now the worst passing defense in the NFL DVA-wise, and if Odell happens to be out, another boost for Tyler Higbee there. So I think he's a good tournament play. And then, like I already mentioned, these two guys down low, Foster Moreau, no Darren Waller, will be the chalk option facing Washington. No real reason to not like Foster there. And then looking at the defenses, not a lot I like, especially down low. Usually we have like a punt defense that we all play. I am not seeing that punt defense this weekend. Like last week, we all played the Houston Texans versus the New York Jets. Well, this week we don't have like just a clear-cut chalk defense. So it looks like we might have to spend up a little bit, which fortunately enough for us, we have cheap running backs, we have cheap tight ends, so we can probably afford a 3K defense. I like the Eagles versus the Jets. I think that speaks for itself. The Buccaneers versus the Falcons, they've been a mess offensively. Problem is, though, if you roster the Buccaneers passing attack, you really want Atlanta to at least score a little bit just to keep them going. So if you are stacking the Buccaneers, try to keep the Buccaneers defense out of there just because it won't make the most sense correlation-wise, but it can still work out. It just doesn't feel that great. Cardinals defense versus the Bears. I mean, I feel like they're going to be pretty chalky. Them and the Dolphins are currently battling to be the highest owned defense in the slate in my projections as of right now. Dolphins facing the Giants. I mean, you can play any defense versus the Giants. I think that's fine. But I think you guys get the idea. Just throw in whoever fits. I'm not going my way to fit in a certain defense in the slate. If I have to settle with 30 or let's say like $2,800, whoever's $2,800, I'll plug in. I mean, unless it's like a defense going against all my offensive players, then that's not going to happen. But I think you guys get the idea there. But with that being said, I think that'll be pretty much it for the video. So I do hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you want to take that one step further, kind of fish member over on Patreon. Link is down below in the description for that. Cheat sheets, optimizers, ownership projections in general, and all that fun stuff. Link can be found down below in the NBA each and every single night. And don't forget, this video was sponsored by PrizePicks. Just you versus projections. That's right now. If you're new, sign over there. You can get a free money bonus up to $100 when you use code CPIN and tell them I sent you. But I think it'll be it. I'll stop rambling. I wish you guys the best of luck this weekend, and we'll do lineup building and core plays tomorrow.